They'll sing of the witcher who saved the king. No one sings of the two men at the door he had to run past. So I will, one last time. My name is Wymar, and for 11 years my whole job was to stand in a hallway and not fall asleep. That's the truth of it. People think a king's guard is all flashing steel in glory. It isn't. It's a hallway. A long, warm, well-lit hallway, the same one every night, with the same draft from the same window and the same crack in the same flagstone that I have stared at for 11 years. Me on one side of the door, young Stenko on the other. We weren't soldiers, not really, not anymore. We were furniture that breathed. And the strange thing about being the last door between a king and the dark is, nothing ever comes. That's how you know you're doing it right. 11 years of nothing. You start to believe nothing is the natural order of the world, and that you're the man who keeps it that way. That night, the city had finally stopped burning. The war was done. The squirrels in the order had spent themselves in the streets, and the king was back, and his sick daughter was cured, they said, by some monster hunter, and Vizima was going to live after all. Even the plague seemed tired. Stenko had bread. He always had bread, squirreled a heel from the kitchens every watch, said a man can't guard a king on an empty belly. He broke it and passed me half across the door, the way he had 1,000 nights, and we stood there chewing in the lamplight, two tired men minding a quiet hall. And I remember thinking, actually thinking the words, this is the good part. This is the part that lasts. I want you to hold that picture. Two men, a loaf, a warm door, because that's the last time the world looked the way I thought it did. He came up the hall like he belonged there. That's the thing nobody tells you about the ones who finally come. You expect them to charge, to shout, to be obviously a wolf. But the real ones walk in like they have an appointment, like the hall is theirs and you're the visitor. Stenko stepped out, hand up, state your business. The words we'd said 10,000 times to drunk lords and lost servants. And the lamplight caught his eyes. I'll not describe it. I've spent the rest of my life not describing it. 11 years of nothing, and it took less time than it takes to say. Stenko was there, with bread still in his other hand, and then the hall was lurching with shadow, and Stenko was on the flagstone by the crack I'd stared at for a decade, and I had not even cleared my sword. And then he looked at me. 11 years I'd stood in that hallway, telling myself I was the last line. The wall. The thing between the king and the dark. And here was the dark, finally, with a man's face in a beast's eyes. And I understood in one cold rush that I was not a wall. I had never been a wall. I was a man of 50 with a sore back and a fat coin purse. And I was going to die in this hallway in the next breath. And it was not going to matter because the door behind me would open just the same. So I did the only thing a furniture man could do. I didn't reach for my sword. He'd have killed me before it cleared the scabbard, the way he'd killed Stenko. I reached for my purse. A night's dicing winnings, fat and heavy and jingling, and I threw it at his eyes. Coins. Against a thing that had cut down Stenko like wheat. It was the most ridiculous defense in the history of kings. A bag of silver thrown by a frightened old man. And for one heartbeat, his eyes followed the glitter. One heartbeat where the dark looked at money instead of at me. And in that heartbeat, something came up the hall behind him. Another set of cat's eyes, white hair, two swords. The monster hunter they said had saved the princess, drawn by the ring of my coins on the stone. I pressed myself flat against the king's door, and I watched the great men finish it. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We sort out the bodies by lamplight after. The witcher fought the witcher-eyed man up and down that hall, and I, the last line of defense, the wall, the thing between the king and the dark. I stood with my back to the door I was sworn to, and I watched, empty-handed, having thrown the only weapon that ever did the kingdom any good, a bag of dicing money at a pair of yellow eyes. The king lived. They'll tell you the witcher saved him, and that's true, and they'll tell you it with the witcher's name and the king's name, and not one other. There were no other names that mattered to the people who sing, but I knew two names: Stenko, who always had bread, and gave me half across the door 1,000 nights, and was eating the other half when the dark walked in like it had an appointment. And mine, Wymar, the man who guarded a king for 11 years and saved him, in the end, by accident, with the only thing he had, by throwing away his money and hoping someone better was coming up the hall behind the wolf. I left a few coins where they fell, left them by the crack in the flagstone with the last of Stenko's bread, the way you leave an offering at a crossroads for the ones who didn't make it through. Nobody ever knew why those coins were there. The servants swept around them for years and thought it a fussy old guard superstition. It was exactly that. The great men rode off into the next war the very next morning, for there's always a next war, and a witcher-eyed killer is rarely the last of his kind. They had a king to bury his enemies with, and kingdoms to win and lose. And I had a hallway to sweep, and a friend to bury, and a crack in a flagstone to leave bread by for the rest of my days. That's the whole of it. That's all I have. I stood in a hallway for 11 years so that nothing would happen. And the one night something did, the most I could do was throw my money at it and pray a better man was near. Most of us never even get that. Most of us just get the standing. And so we come to the end of the Salamander Years. The Witcher rides on into wars not yet sung, toward kings not yet murdered. The smoke clears over Vizima, and the small people, the grave diggers and the working girls, the clerks and the fishermen, the novices and the door guards, go back to the standing and the sweeping and the bread. The great men get the songs, the rest of us get the morning after. This was theirs.